In this video today, we're looking at T-beams. This is a fairly simple T-beam. What I've got in the model is a 5-meter long beam, and I've used the standard profile, the TC profile from our catalog. So if we just execute our catalog, we can see it's listed under T profiles, concrete, TC, and all I've done is I've adapted some dimensions to suit concrete. Now, as a note here, the web in the flange is 150 millimeters, and so is the chamfer, 150, 150. So the members are fairly small, it's fairly narrow, which is typical of a precast beam. And then the overall height and width is 900 and 1200. So with that in mind, I am not going to look at strand patterns or strands at this stage. I only want to focus on reinforcement, and specifically manual reinforcement using rebar sets. Not components. I think there is a lot of value in knowing how to model manually using rebar sets, and to some extent they're quicker to use than to try and work through all the dialog box and the typical component. Components are really fast and quick if they are simple, but when you have 6, 7, 8 pages of component dialog, it just takes you half an hour to configure it. By that time, you've scheduled the whole beam already. So with that in mind, what we can do is I'll show you what the intention is. Now I have done a run on this prior to generate this little T-beam screenshot for us, because I didn't have a proper reinforcement example at hand. So what we're going to do is we're going to first focus on the outer reinforcement. So it's the cyan bars that you see in the flange of the beam, spaced at 200. And then we're going to focus on the red ones, which is the outer layer of the web. And then once we've done that, we'll focus on the next bar they'll typically insert as a process of construction, and that's the blue bars. And then we will look at the purple bars, and then lastly the distribution bars, which is these blue ones, and all basically spaced at 200s in both directions to give us this 200 by 200 grid. So with that in mind, let's just see how we can reinforce this. Now, I do have 3 views open. One is on grid line A, which is just straight on the front of the window, and the other one is on grid line A, which is just a side elevation. And this is the 3D view, just the standard 3D view. And I'll make that transparent. So what I like to do with beams like these is I start from the outer layer and I work inwards. And also I like to start with sort of a process of how they would construct, with the exception that in this case I'm just going to do the top one first so I can get a gauge to do the vertical one. So for the top one, if we go to crossing and we select our catalog and we select main bars being 8, also in these you can't, because it's got 150 flange, you're going to struggle to fit anything bigger than a 10 or a 12 in there, with the bending rules we have. For the class, I'm going to go to a 5. I'm going to clear our start and end offset, and for the distribution I'm going to select a target of 200 just to start out with, to get something. Now if we use a crossing bar and we click over here, we can use it. We can say we want to select this face and that face, and then pull this face all the way to there once it's created, to create the ligatures. But the easier way to do that, and I'll just escape out of the command there, is to go to more and go to point input. Make sure you're linear. We should still have our settings. And then once we go, we can just follow the perimeter we want to reinforce, just like we'd normally do with rebar groups, except this is rebar sets. Return, and then middle mouse button, that's the shape we want. And then what we can do is we can grab this one and go all the way over to this side, and that will create a closed ligature for us. Now, they would not necessarily use a ligature in a beam like that, because they need to access the web to insert the reinforcement, and if they have to feed it in from the side, you'll probably end up with a lot of angry people. So what we do is we normally split this one on the top and leave the top bar out so we can deal with the ones on the bottom. So for that reason, I'm going to put a splitter on here. So if I click on that and I go to splitter, I can then say, if I just look at the direction of this line, it looks like Tekla is working from, as we view this one, from the bottom to the top. So if I assume that, I can also say that I want the lap to be on the right hand side for that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hover over until I sort of snap to that line there. And if I do that, Tekla will split it on the right hand side for me. And then if I flick over to the left and I repeat it on the other side, Tekla will split it down the other side. Now, if we look at what's happened here, because we picked this little edge as our guide, it's generated the two splitters down the bottom for us. Now all we need to do is grab this splitter, holding control, grab that splitter. Always check your property pane that you've only got the splitter selected, and then we can say right click, copy special linear, and we can copy from the bottom of the beam to the top of the beam and say copy, clear. Okay, now what it's done is it's copied it. I should have actually, let me just undo that. That should have been a move. So I'll just click on that, control click on that one, right click and say move special linear, and we'll go from the bottom of the beam and we go to the top of the beam and say move, clear. Now what we've got is we've got the reverse of what we had. So this bar will then be inserted once all the other bars are inserted to give them a bit of a working space. So essentially we could, I suppose we could have done a copy. It will give us working space down here too, but I think this will suffice. So the next step we want to do is we want to deal with the Control P. We want to deal with the bars in the web, the outer layer, and so for that, I'll go into a 3D mode. I think this is the best view to do it in. I will this time go to a crossing bar. It's the same size, but instead of using a 5, I'm going to use a class 2 for the red, and I'll use the same parameters, and I'll hover over the web and just accept it. And the shape is okay, but the range is not. So if we go to adjust guideline location, you're going to see Tekla wants to put bars into the full range. So all I'll do is I'll drag the top of the range down to there. We only want to go to the bottom of the slab and say okay. So you can now see how Tekla's generated reinforcement only up to that point. Now if we just temporarily go and put on our leg faces, click away, click on the bar, you can see the Tekla's also generated faces here, which we're never going to use. So what I normally do as good practice, just to prevent issues in the future, is to click on that face, make sure you've got the face selected, and then delete it. Click on this face, make sure you've got it, and then delete it. And that pretty much is what that bar is going to do. It's only going to operate in that area. If you really want, you can put a face on top, which in that case it will control cover at the top as well. And if you want to know how to put a face on the top, it's very easy. You can just say add a leg face, and then go into manual mode here, a multi-point mode, and then pick this point to that point to the opposite point, and then over to this point. And once you hit middle mouse button, Tekla now has another face that encapsulates that whole beam. And if we now look at this face, you can now actually give it values. You know, it will now sort of start using this thing as a face you can work with. It's not needed. You can do it if you want. In this case, I'm just going to grab it and delete it because we don't really need it here, but it's just a little side note. If you get to a point where you do need a face there, you can work it. Because we've got the guideline, we'll just use the offsets to control the extent of it. Now that we've got that, we can just flick over to our side elevation so we can see these bars from the side. And what I want to do is I want to just split these bars up so we end up with a U bar on either side and a straight bar at the end. So with that, I can click on the bar, switch off my leg faces so they don't bother us. And then what I'll do is go to splitter, reset my splitter to the default. And then when I hover over this bar, it gives us the leg lap. So let's target 500. That's a good place to split. So we go split. And if you click and nothing has happened, it looks like it's asking for a second point. It's because we're still in a multi-point mode here. So what I'll do is I'll just escape out of that. I'll flick over to single point mode. And now if I enable the splitter again, we have our line. You can now see how our split line moves. 500 is good for this side. And if I go over to the other side and also pick a 500 here, it splits those bars. Now, these two splitters will only be on the near side, not on the far side. So if we click this one and we hold control, we pick the opposite one. And then what we can see is make sure you've got two splitters selected. Right click, copy special linear, and we can just copy it from this face of the beam to the opposite face. Say copy, and that will split it exactly at the same place as the front face, and we end up with these U bars and the straight bars in between. Now, to make sure we don't need another splitter for these long bars, we need to check if they are over stock length sizes. So if I go to single bar here, and I just pick one of them, right click, inquire, I can see that the length of that bar is only 4.3 meters, so I'm not going to bother about splitting them again. It's not needed. The beam is too short. So having the U's at the end is good enough for them to be able to fix these bars simply. Now you've probably also noticed that in the tapered part, we didn't get any bars split. The split as such only went to the bottom of the taper. So to put a split on the top portion of it, what we can do is um, well, there's actually a few things we can do, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a construction line between and see if this works. Construction line between those 2 points there, just to have a guide. And I'm also going to do it on this side, that point to that point. So that will give us 2 construction lines. And now if we go to the top view and we go Control P to see it, and we zoom in a bit, we should see them there. We don't. If we don't see them, if I can just swing, if we don't see them and we hit this little scissors here, it will show us our depth of range, and it looks like we don't have a problem. It's the depth of range is good, so we don't have a problem with that. So then what we'll have to do is, oh, there we go. They are visible. So maybe if they're not clear, we could just quickly grab both of them, this one and control this one, and let's just make them solid, and let's just make them purple or magenta and say modify, so we can just see them a bit better. So once we've got that, Control P, they're right under the bars. Okay, so what we can do with that, we can, while they're selected, we can then hold in Shift, select the concrete, and also select the bars we want to manipulate. Right click, hold in Shift, show only selected. That sort of makes it much clearer. Now we can see our bar there. Now what we can do now is if we click on this bar, we can enable our splitter again, and this time hover over the, if you hover over the bar, you're not going to get any splitter, but if you hover over the concrete, you do get a splitter if you do this. So what we can do is, you can see there it's just not giving us the right increment. So what we can do is, if we just zoom up a little bit, we get the right increment there, and if we split there, it splits those bars. And if I come over here, there we go, split those bars. And now if we go to the opposite end, we can do the same. Make sure you're zoomed in enough so you do get the increment of where that splitter lies. And this side, click there, it splits there. Now that you've done that, and we look in 3D what we've got, we can now see that we've got those bars split exactly in the same place. And just to do a sanity check on these, if we go down to our group selector, and we select this group of views, but we also select shift that group of views, right click, and we say inquire, we can then go and check the A and the C dimension. You can see we've got legs of 500 exactly. The only thing that differs is the middle leg, which the one is 100 and the other one is 395. So it's pretty good that we got that in exactly the same place. It's a bit of a trick, but it's it's easily overcome. So having done that, we can just say redraw the whole uh, model so we can see what we've got. So now we've got the outer layer in the flange on top. We also have the outer layer in the web. And now from there, we can start putting in all the secondary steel, the steel that's in there. Now, what I want to do, if I just grab my picture again, the next thing I want to target is this bar, this upside down hat that goes in there, because obviously after they've put in these horizontal bars, the next bar they will put into this formwork is that one. They'll drop this down in here. So let's just see how that works. So for that, I'll go on to the end elevation, this one, and I will go to construction line, which is a L on my keyboard, and I'll just click that point, and I'll make sure that I cross the top point. I'll click this point and just drag it up, so I've got some reference. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to more, point input, make sure I'm linear, make sure that my bars are set up, my properties are set up right. In this case, we want a blue bar, and then we'll pick the same distribution of 200, and then I'll just pick any point, any line there, and I'll go Actually, we don't even need that. We can put a hook on both of those, but since we've got it, we might as well just use it. So I'll just follow the line along here and also just pick a random length there and middle mouse. And now Tekla's asking me for a range, so we can just pick anywhere on the edge of the concrete, yeah? And then on the other opposite end, just make sure that we snap perpendicular, and that will give us our range of these little um, upside down top hats. Now what we need to do with these, if I click on them and I click on the concrete and just right click and say show only selected, what I need to do there is just control the leg lengths quickly. So if I click on those, I can go to end detail, load my defaults, and instead of having a hook type, we can say we don't want a hook type, but what we do want is we want an adjustment type of leg length, and the leg length we want to implement there is, let's call it 300 millimeters. And then once we've got that, we can hover over this leg, and Tekla will force a 300 leg for us. And if we go over here, Tekla will force a 300 leg for us. And now if we click on that bar and we go right click inquire, we can see there's our 300 leg, it's vertical dimension, and then the little 80 at the bottom. Now you can see why I'm using 8mm size. We've got 80 there. It's going to be very hard or impossible to fit a 12 or 16. It just can't be bent. It's really small, so that's why I'm using 8s. So with that in mind, we'll redraw everything to see how we go. Now we do have some clashes, but we'll figure out the spacing as we go. But that's looking pretty good at the moment. The only thing that I might want to adjust straight away off the bat, if we look at that, we can see that these bars that we've just inserted ended up in the second layer because we already had these bars in. So now what we can do is, and this is why it's always nice to use a face, if we click on that bar, enable our leg visibility, we can click on this face, make sure it's selected here, and then you see how it comes up with a layer 2. We can then force that into layer 1. We can click on this side and then force that into a layer 1, and just like that we have fixed up that bar. It now goes from the top. Now all we need to do is look at the bottom, and it does go all the way to the bottom, so that's pretty good. So that's pretty much dealt with that bar. Now we've got 3 more bars to put in, the 2 crisscross bars and then the distribution steel here. So for the crisscross bars, again I will just go to the end elevation, and for this what I'm going to do is I'll delete those 2 construction lines. I will draw a construction line L on my keyboard, and I will draw it along this edge here. You can see the construction line there. And then what I'll do with this construction line is I will just extend it a little bit. If I click on it, you get this sort of grip. Now what you need to do is when you move is, while you're moving it, you've got to make sure that your vertical and your horizontal stays the same value to enable the 45, because you don't have a snap mode because you're not in a XY plane, you're in XZ plane. So once you do that, if you can see there, if I just stretch, you can see 200 by 200. If you default a little bit, that's 200 by 150. That's not 45 degrees, but that is. So that's sort of a quick way to ensure that you are actually 200 by 200, you are actually at 45 degrees. Now, once you have that, we know where this bar is going to intersect, or the bar face is going to intersect this face and that face. So with that, we can go back to more point input, and then we'll use the purple color as per in our previous picture. We've got everything else is the same. So what we can do now is just again just pick an edge, any point to start out with, pick our intersection, and then hover across to the other side, pick an intersection just a random distance down, and say accept. We're happy with that. And now for the distribution of that, we can just pick the middle of this face and all the way up to the middle of the opposite face there. And just like that, we now have that bar generated for us. Now what we need to do is just adjust, and I'll delete the construction line because we don't need it anymore, is adjust. Now you see, because we're working with rebar sets and we're working with leg faces as such, look, Tekla's already figured out this one, the red one was put in before the purple one. This is why I say it's it will save you. You can always change it afterwards. You can swap these faces around, these orders, from a 1 to a 2 and a 2 to a 1. But if you understand that from the start, you can save yourself a lot of time by just doing it right from day one. You know what's going to happen. So what we're going to do with this one is, we know that this face here, you can see how it buds up on the inside of that leg. I really want that to be in line with that. I'll figure the spacings out last. So what I'll do is I'll click on this face, because this is the face I want to control. And you can see there in the layer number, it's got a 3. We want that into the 2. So you can see it's now in the same plane as that bar, which is correct. And then this one, yeah, we also want this to come up to the very top face. So if we click on this one, you can see that's punched it into the face 2. So if we move that into 1, it's now in the same plane as all the others, which is pretty good. Okay, now the last thing we need to do with that bar before we start playing with or copying it across is to just take that in the concrete and then say show only selected, so it's isolated. We need to look at this leg length because we really want to control leg length here. So if I click on the bar, I can then go to our end modifier again. We've still got no hook. We've got our length to 300. So in this case, let's make it say 250. Just see where we get to there. Now if I hover over this edge, it will then force that leg to be 250. And if I hover over this leg, it will force this leg to be 250. Now let's just look how that, if that actually delivered the correct result. So if I click on the bar, right click, inquire, I can now see from our bending schedule that indeed we do have the first leg as 250, our last leg is 250, and then the skewed leg at 264, and then the 45-degree angle, which is measured in offsets, is then 185 by 185, which gives us the 45 degree to generate the 460 length. So with that, I think that leg is done. So if we go Control P just to get it on edge again, and I'll do redraw so I can see everything. Now for us to get this onto that side, we need to look at the axis. So at the moment we're in the ZX plane. So what we can do is we can go to View, and we can go to our work plane and then say parallel to the view plane, and then just click on the view. That will swap the axis around to the XY plane. And now that we've got that, we can click on this bar, right click. Sorry, I'm not in my rebar sets mode, so just make sure you're in your rebar sets mode. If we click on this, we can then say right click, copy special mirror, and we can mirror about the center of this beam and say copy, and that then will produce the exact same bar on the opposite side. Now if we look at this, we've pretty much got our crisscross bars down, we've got our vertical top pad down, we've got our distribution bars, we've got those. So the only bar that remains now is our distribution in the top. Now again with this one, what we can do is we can go rebar, we can go crossing, and I'll change the color. Let's just pick a total different color. I'm just gonna, I see in the photo we've got blue as well, but I'll change it. I'll make it yellow in this case. If we hover over this, Tekla is going to give us the right bar, but the faces is going to be a bit of a mess. So if I just enable our face, it's going to try and fit the bars through all these faces, so you can get all kinds of different bars in here. So that is not an option. Well, what is an option is you could again drag this down to that point and say, okay, that's correct, and then pull these faces all the way to that end. But that becomes also hard work. So again, more point input comes to the rescue, linear, and then what we can do is we can just draw a bar around the outside of the slab for us. Back to the origin, middle mouse to accept the shape, and then for the distribution I'll just pick one edge of the concrete and perpendicular to the other edge, and just like that, Tekla has now generated a bar for us. And now all we need to do with this bar is, you can see it's in the same plane. We can just do this and say I think this is move innermost. It's not going to play ball, so what we can do is click on it, enable our visibility leg group, click on this one, and then say this is going to be in the second layer, and it will move it in for us. We can also make sure that that happens in the bottom layer. So if we click on this layer, double click 2, and that fixes that up for us. And you can see that those yellow bars are now nicely inside of those outer bars. So now that we've got all the bars in, this is all the bars we require, we can now start looking at spacing. Now, I think for this exercise, I'll go to the side elevation, Control P, side elevation, and we'll pick, let's pick these top hats, these long blue bars. Let me just make sure I've selected long that one. Let's pick that, and I'll switch off the leg visibility. Let's pick these bars as our main spacer, vertical spacer. And what we can do with them to start out with is, if we also, for this, I'm going to switch off all the modifiers because we don't need them anymore. I'll leave the bar dimension on and the guideline on. And now if I click on that bar, we can see the guideline easier. If we click on the guideline, we can go to our modify spacings and we can see what Tekla is giving us: 55, 55, and then 200. It's giving us 25 at 195.6. Now, I think it's better if we space this with exact spacings, because then what's going to happen, we can add the others very easily. So as a first go, what I'll do is I will create a odd first and last space, and the intermediates will be at 200. Once we say modify, you can now see, just looking at the dimensions here, Tekla is generating 23 at 200, and on the start, it's got an odd dimension of 145, and at the end, it has an odd dimension of 145. And I think that will work for now. Let's just leave that. So we've just got to remember this: 23 at 200, 145, 145. We've just got to remember that, make a side note or whatever. And then also what I want to do is I don't want that bar to move around anymore. I just want to make sure that, yeah, I think we can deal with it. If something moves, then we'll deal with it, but I don't think it will. The next bar I want to align with it is this little one at the top. So I want this one to follow suit with the other one. So now what I'm going to do is, first thing is I'm going to start at the start. Just make sure that the arrow start is this side. And now it doesn't want to, just escape. Sometimes I struggle to ban. But anyway, if I click on that ligature or that upside down U with its filler bar or its lapping bar, I can now say I know that this bar, or this bar, blue bar rather, has got a 55 to the center cover. So if we add 10 millimeters to that, which is 65, and I also say that my target is exact spacings, and then we know that our main spacing is 23 at 200. That's the main spacing. Our start spacing is 145 space. So all we have to do is we've got to adapt the other side. Now that's a double bar. That's a single bar that we're gonna space from. So if we subtract 10 millimeters from that, like 135, let's see if that works. If I say enter, you can now see that that bar, the highlighted bar, is now spaced exactly in line with the blue bar. And if we get to the end of it, uh, at the end of that, I've made a calculation error there. They are actually doubles. So you've got to take twice the amount off. So that should be 25. And if I do that, you can see that works out nicely for us. Does it? No, it doesn't. You can see they're still lapping there. So we need to take another 10 off. So that will then become 15. If I do that, that now lines up nicely with this bar. Okay, now that we've done those two, we can go and look at the first. Well, let's do the back one first. The tapering bar. So we know that this one is at 115, so another 10 from that. So if we look at this, was that 115? If I'm not sure, I always just go and click on it. So this here is 165, I beg you. So that one will be 75. So we need to do this at 85. So if we click that and we make that 85, let's just see what that happens. Okay, that works. And then all we need to do is work with our target again, which is exact spacing. And in here, we know that our middle spacing is 23 at 200. The start is always 145, and the end now will be reduced even more. So we had 115, so let's try 105 now because we need to go 10 in. So once I do that, you can see the highlighted bar now sort of follows sequence 100%. And let's just see what happened at the end. So at the end, we still have proper sequence, but there we go. It's this one, yeah. We just select it again. Actually, that's not right. It's this one. This one is the one we set. So you can see the sequence is perfect except at the end. We again, it's a double bar. I didn't account for the double bar, so that spacing has got to become even smaller. So from the middle of this bar to the middle of that bar is 10. So we need to go another 10. So we've got to take 20 off this. So that will be 95. So if I do that, and again, it looks like I've got a 10 millimeter error. It's 85. Okay, there we go. So it's 85, and that puts that one in there. And now lastly, we need to look at this one. Now this one um, can actually just, yeah, it can come in the same plane, but it's going to clash with this one down the bottom leg, at the point where they cross. So let's just see how that works out. Control P. So if we want this bar, it's got to start. If I click on this one started at 85. So I click on this one, it's got to be 95. So it starts at 95. So if I do that, it starts there. That's perfect. And then if we go to our exact spacings, we know again it's 23 by 200. And then the start is always 145. And now we've just got to look at the end. So the end, I'll just try 75 for now, 10 less than what we had before. If I do that, we can see that that sort of slots in very nicely with the others. And if we go to the end, we can see we actually, again, I always seem to be making the error with the 10 millimeters. If I adjust that, we can then see everything works very, very well. So what we ended up doing is you're always going to get, when bars cross, like in this case, these two cross here. There's no way around it. Beg your pardon. There's no way around it. You're going to have to just deal with that little void there, because no matter where you put it, even if you put it this side, they're never going to be smack bang on. Suppose you could put it at the end, but then you're going to have to, see if it will fit in with your ligatures. And in this case, it probably would. So, but I prefer when they cross like that. It doesn't hurt anybody. So that sorts that out. And now while I'm here, I see I forgot to do the breakup of these. So let's just do that next. If I click on these bars, I also click on the concrete, right click, show and deselect it. And then I go into our plan view, which is this one, Control P. And we just reselect it because I swapped the views, and I hold in my shift. Okay, there we go. So now what I can do is I can click on these and I can go to our splitter again, make sure I load my standards. And then if I hover over the bar, I can just aim for a 500 leg. That splits that one. And then if I go to the opposite side, I can aim for a 500 leg. That splits that side. And now that would be split on the top. And if we just go back into a 3D view, if I now click on the bar, now remember it doesn't show the splitters because they still switched off here. If I switch them on, I'll see them. If I click this splitter and I hold in my control key and I click on that splitter over there, just make sure that you've got two splitters selected. We can now go and say copy special linear, copy it from the top of the beam to the bottom of the beam and say okay, copy. That will split those up. And if we look at the bar, right click, inquire, we do have exact 500 legs. And there's 14 of them, so is there 14 straight bars, 7 at the bottom, 7 at the top. So that works well. So now that we've got that, this whole beam should be finished. And what we can do is we can just have a look at, if we don't have any clashes, and it doesn't seem like we do. The last thing I want to do quickly is just if I go Control P, I want to look at this. I just want to see if we need to make some adjustments. Now, this one on top here, this inner bar here, I would really like to see maybe a bar there and maybe a bar there. So at the moment, if I click on that, I can see we're generating 7 bars. So if I change this to by number and I just increase that by one more and say, okay, now that's a much better solution. That is a much better solution. I just want to see if we go 10 equal numbers. That's even better. So although the spacing now is 120 millimeters and the engineer is asking for 200, I think this is a better solution because now we're getting bars in the corners there and in the corners there where we really need them. We can do the same here if we click on this guy. So at the moment, if we look at that, we've got 5 bars, and if we take that number, just want to see what happens if we go 6 bars. 6 bars, and that is 144. So it looks like in this case 5 bars is the better solution. And what we can do, I beg your pardon, just want to clear my throat quickly. What we can do here is we can just give this one at the bottom a bit more space. So instead of 30, let's go 50. So that brings that up a little bit. So that looks good. This one is sort of sitting right there at the cross where you want it. And this one is sitting up at the top. I suppose it's at 0. I suppose we could move that down a little bit like so. And then that's, I think, a very good arrangement. So now that we've got that, let's just click over back to our 3D rendered mode. And if we look at these, and maybe for the visual, because we're really done with this, go Ortho, go Perspective, Modify, OK. We look at this in more of a perspective view. We can see that the rebar on this is really all done, and there's no clashes. They're all done with rebar sets, and we've got full control over the spacing, the lapping, as well as the layering. At any time, if you send this away for approval, maybe you're the detailer and you want the engineer to do a sanity check on this, and he comes back and he says, oh, it's brilliant, but I want you to swap these around. It's easy to do in rebar sets. You don't have to remodel. You just click and swap. And yeah, we didn't calculate any bar lengths or anything like that. So I think this is a pretty good solution and a very good application for rebar sets. Sometimes components are really, really fast. But in this case, I think rebar sets is equally fast. I mean, if we just, for instance, what I can do, let me just put this back into auto mode, modify, OK. If we take this beam, and I'll just replicate it quickly and then delete the reinforcement in it, copy linear, and I'll copy from this grid to a middle grid, yeah? Where's the midpoint? There's a midpoint, and say copy. And then what I'll do is I will just, now, in terms of the reinforcement, there's the first set, there's the second set, third set, fourth set, fifth set, sixth set. There's 6 bar sets in this. I mean, it's really not much to clear that whole beam. But what I want to show is that if we take this beam, for instance, and we just slightly change its length to maybe the full length of the grid, we can then say in here, if we click all of it as an assembly, and then right click, unselect the concrete, make sure you only have rebar sets, and there's confirmation, 6 sets. We can then say right click, copy special to another object, and then if we pick this T and we go over to this T, Tekla will replicate the bar, but it's already accounted for all of the others except for this range, because the reason why the ranges didn't adapt is because if you click on these, we've actually made them exact spacing. If we now just click all of those, well, one thing we can do to change all of this is to just grab these that are involved. If we grab this one, I think these, and also these, if we just grab all of them involved, and you just go and say start is, make sure it's clear, creation method is target spacing, and you go 200, and you say okay, it will then repopulate the whole beam again, and you can just go and check your clashes again like we did before, and it's as simple as that. It's worked out. That's the only, I suppose, downside from working with exact spacings, is if you do have alternate lengths, it will impact, if you've made them exact, it will impact the length, because you're now really restricting the number of bars you want to create. But in this case, it's very easily done. We can just go through that same process again of, making this the primary bar, fixing up the spacing, and then just resetting the others to get it clash free. So I think it's pretty good in that regard. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope that was somehow useful. It's certainly, I enjoy working with rebar sets. And you don't necessarily have to follow the exact the formula or the process that I follow, as long as you learn something about how to use the tool and you can apply it to your scenario. Hopefully that will help you. Well, I'll see you in the next video.